Well, welcome to the Legends of Elections series. I'm here with Shelley McThomas, former election director for Kansas City, Missouri. Shelley, thank you for being here and talking with me today.
Thank you so much for having me, Matt.
Shelley, let's start. You have an incredible backstory leading into how you got into elections. Can you just tell us a little bit about your story and how you ended up in the elections profession?
Well, I always start by saying I was minding my own business, running a small public affairs firm, when I was asked to apply for the director's position at the Kansas City, Missouri Board of Elections. And prior to that, I had been very active in terms of supporting candidates and handing out literature. I'd been a delegate to the 2000 convention and an alternate to the 2004 Democratic convention. And my background also included working in television and radio and Kansas City's Heart of America Shakespeare Festival and public relations here in Washington, D.C. So I'd had a really varied background, which of course meant that I was going to eventually work in elections administration.
Naturally, it's a natural transition.
It's a natural transition. And so I was invited or encouraged to apply for the position. And I sort of came kicking and screaming, and I read the description and I said, oh, is that what they do? Oh, I can do, okay, all right, I'll apply. And so I did. And I started on November 1st, 2007, right before the tsunami that became the 2008 election year. And I never looked back. I became an elections junkie. I loved the work, I loved working with the staff that I had, loved meeting elections officials from around the country, and I was a kindred spirit with them.
So you mentioned you started on November 1st. Presumably there was an election 4 or 5 days afterwards?
Absolutely, there was. I was the deer in the headlights because I knew nothing about the inner workings of an election.
So when you walked in the door knowing that you had an election coming right up, and then you get through that election, what did you learn just in that first election? What were your big takeaways as you headed sort of into the career after a few days on the job running your first election?
Yeah, well, I said, oh my God, what have I gotten myself into? And I learned that poll workers don't show up, and this was quite a shock to me when people don't show up for work. And I learned that I didn't know a lot about the inner workings of an election and the management and the logistics and how the supplies get to the polls, and then how the ballots, which were no longer really ballots because by this time it was all electronic, how the ballots return to the election office and how they get counted and how the results are issued and all of those good things. So it was quite an eye-opener,
So you walk away from that first election where you were just days into the job, and you head into the next year to prepare for a presidential election in 2008. What's your checklist look like? What did your things to learn, for Shelley McThomas include that you knew you had to learn right away?
Well, I actually had 2.5 months because back then Missouri's presidential primary was in February.
Wow.
And so we actually started prepping for that immediately, and that was my first election. And at the time, my counterpart, Missouri is a bipartisan election state. I was the Democratic director. I had a Republican. I called him my daytime husband. He said, oh, the primaries are usually, very small, just a wash, nothing to worry about. And I'm a news junkie. I've been watching TV, I'm looking at the news, and I'm saying, I don't think so. But what did I know? I'd only been on board a few months. But I'm thinking, no, I think people are going to turn out. And then 2 weeks before the election, the party sent the candidate, at the time, President Barack Obama, to Kansas City. Oh my gosh, we had a huge election. We did. We had a huge turnout. But within those 2 months, I tried to immerse myself really in the logistics and the preparation, and I asked a million questions. I'm sure the staff at the time was rolling their eyes and saying, get rid of her. They're trying to prepare, and I'm asking every question. because the devil's in the details, as you know. And I remember wanting to focus on why poll workers wouldn't show up and how can we avoid that, and also memory cards that failed to be returned to the office. We had a couple of instances in that November night where we had to go back out and get the memory cards, and that was a huge eye-opener also. So I kind of focused on those things.
So as you look back at Shelley, who took the job on that November 1st, 2007, and the Shelley that sits here now, what advice would you give yourself looking back and tell yourself on that November 1st, 2007?
Probably take it a little slower. I wanted to make a lot of changes really fast. Coming from the private sector, you're on a different kind of timetable, and the public sector moves a bit more slowly. So that would be the advice. Take it a little slower. Wait maybe a year before you want to make a lot of changes, especially if it's a presidential election year.
What were the changes you wanted to make, and how successful were they?
I eventually made them. I wanted to reorganize the staff.
It's a big change.
Big change. Yeah. I had started researching just what was going on in elections, and I discovered the Election Center and IACRIAT and the Pew's election site and the Election Assistance Commission. So I'm reading all of this and finding out what the trends are and what's going on and making a list saying, yeah, we need to do this, we need to do this, and let's try to do this. And so I was really, really gung-ho about making the Kansas City Election Board cutting edge and just making sure that not only were we on top of everything and using all the latest techniques and best practices, but that voters were also going to get the best service that they'd ever gotten from the Kansas City Election Board.
You raise a really interesting challenge for election officials, and that is, I don't know an election official that doesn't want to find new or innovative ways to better serve voters. It's in your nature, it's what election officials do, but change comes hard in elections, right?
Yes.
So what advice do you have on planning and implementing change within particularly a local election office?
It's probably the same advice that you would hear even if you weren't working in an election office. You need to get buy-in from your staff. You need to get buy-in from your co-director in this case. And you need to get buy-in from your commissioners who must approve any change. And then you need buy-in from the voters, particularly if it's something major like introducing electronic poll books, which we did, or even new equipment, which I missed that. That happened the year before I started. So you really have to get buy-in, and you have to sort of campaign and make sure that everyone understands why the change is going to occur.
Let's take the voter part first, because I think you're exactly right. I think it's a great point. How did you go about getting that buy-in? What steps specifically did you take to get buy-in on a change like that?
The best example I can use is for electronic poll books. I discovered them, saw them very early on, and immediately wanted to get them for Kansas City. I mean, this was so far back that when we finally did put out a request for proposal, there were really only two companies manufacturing electronic poll books. And so I think I saw them maybe at a conference and immediately said, oh my gosh, yes, we can get rid of those paper register books. Oh, we need this. Yes, yes, yes. And so first I had to convince my co-director and share with him what I'd seen and tried to describe it. And then the second thing, of course, is the cost, the money. Well, what's this going to cost us? Then you've got to convince your staff. You've got to convince the Board of Commissioners who will approve the money, but also will need to know what that piece of technology is and what it will do. And then your poll workers who are going to use the electronic poll books, and the public who can make or break you on election day, right? So it took about 3 years. Took about 3 years.
From the time that you saw them at the...
From the time that I saw them, we did 2 trial tests, I think in August and an off-year November election, at 5 polls. And it's like a campaign. We alerted the media that we were doing this, we alerted the public. The poll workers that we had been trained on them. We alerted the voters who would be coming into those polls and seeing that new equipment. And luckily it went smoothly. It really did. And everyone was on board. So then you just had to find the money to pay for it.
So then when you go and implement, and I think e-poll books are a wonderful example, when you go to implement something like that, what procedures do you take in order to ensure that if they don't function properly or they're not working correctly, that you have a plan? How did you prepare to implement those for the first time?
Yeah, well, you have a backup and then you have a backup to the backup. We still printed the paper rosters to have at those polls so that if for any reason the e-poll books failed, we could still look the voter up the old-fashioned way, have them sign the paper roster. So that was pretty much our backup. Yeah.
Your office, I know from coming and seeing it and meeting with you, embrace technology, particularly within the office and strategies to get efficiencies within the office. How did you, as the head of the office, weigh your choices to use technology and kind of balance the risks with the benefits and that? How'd you make decisions on that?
Yeah. I like technology, and I have a lot of nieces and nephews who I communicate with a lot, and I like to know what's going on in their lives, and so they help me. They don't know, but they've kind of been my guinea pigs on different things. And then I had a great staff guy who's very good with technology also. And I would share with him things that I would see at the conferences and say, you know, this is what's going on now. And so it's not hard to make the decision if you know that, number one, it's going to increase efficiency. It's going to be better for the voter. It's going to be better for the office. I mean, it's a no-brainer. And we know that technology is not going away. It's only going to keep improving, and software developers and programmers are going to figure out ways to make our lives easier with technology. And so the elections arena is no different. Technology is going to continue to drive how we conduct elections and how we manage elections. So I guess my thinking was, we need to roll with this technology thing, guys. Otherwise we're going to be antiquated. We won't be serving our voters to the fullest extent. So let's jump on it. When we see something, let's weigh it. Let's see if it's something we need to think about doing. And let's find the money to do it.
It's one thing to ask your staff to manage that technology. It's another thing, and you already mentioned it, to ask poll workers to manage the technology, right? And
yes.
you mentioned some of the challenges with poll workers. What techniques, strategies did you use both to recruit poll workers, but then to train them, particularly as technology was evolving? You were introducing things like e-poll books.
Well, we would bring in our most critical poll workers, you know, the ones who know our jobs better than we do, who always told us what we did wrong and what we needed to do and what we weren't doing. So we would bring them in to test, for example, the e-poll books and to see how they reacted and to get their input before we even try to roll it out. And we did the same thing most recently with another new procedure that we were going to try. We brought some of the difficult poll workers in because we knew that if we could get their support and buy-in, we could pretty much get the rest of the group to go along with it. And as you know, Matt, poll workers, who are the most wonderful resource in elections administration, are an average age of about 70, which is the new 50. But they are hesitant to change sometimes, and they like to do things the way they've always done them. And we had some people who said, well, I'm not going to learn this electronic poll book, I'm going to quit. And the best example was a gentleman, he quit, and then for some reason he went and took a computer course at the library, and he came back and asked if he could rejoin us as an election judge.
Right.
And he realized that it was simple, it was easy to use, and so we're very proud of that.
Yeah. It's a great idea to bring in your most challenging poll workers, right? That fantastic suggestion. Kind of taking a step back as you look at your time as the Director of Elections in Kansas City, can you share with us a time, a story where you were most challenged, and what you learned from that, and how you kind of took that and applied that moving forward?
Most challenge probably would be our state primary election, a very narrow margin with a recount on the horizon. One vote margin election night, and those are unofficial, or maybe it was three unofficial results on election night. Very contentious contest. And not only did we have a recount, but we had a court case, a trial, our election judges had to testify. There was a lot of media coverage. I called on Doug Lewis to keep me sane. It was very challenging. We got through it. The candidate who was the unofficial winner on election night ended up being the official winner after we went through all of the court challenges. This went up to the Court of Appeals even. So it was very challenging, very challenging. And what was the other part of the
What
question?
did you learn from that? What did you take away? How did you apply those lessons to improve the process moving forward?
One thing I learned is don't announce results of a recount so quickly until you've really double-checked everything. There are a lot of people in the room. The lawyers for both candidates are there. It's busy. The election board's attorneys are there. And you really should let everybody clear out, settle down, and just go through and double-check everything. So that was a learning experience. There were a lot of lessons learned during that period.
Let me ask you, because that high-profile recounts like that, right, are something that, God willing, not every election official goes through, but likely will. As you look at that, what advice beyond, I think, the recount advice and the timing of the results, what other advice do you have? Because I think as we look towards November, there are a lot of election officials, I think, that haven't gone through it or either new and haven't gone through that level of scrutiny. And so what techniques did you use to manage that level of scrutiny?
One, you have to stay calm. You really have to stay calm. Otherwise, you will make other kinds of mistakes. You have to always also respond to the media promptly, accurately, and honestly. And if you don't know the answer, let them know that, and let them know that you will get back to them. You just can't wing it. You can't wing it. The other thing, and I used to say to staff, we don't take shortcuts in the preparation of elections. And the reason you don't want to take shortcuts is because if you come under the scrutiny of a recount, you want to be able to show and prove that you did everything by the letter of the law, that you followed every single step. And then you don't have to worry if you're in a situation like that.
Embrace the procedures, right?
You have embraced the procedures, you followed all of the laws, you took no shortcuts, and you're fine, because when that all comes out in court or just through an investigation or anyone asking, you can feel very confident that you've done everything correctly.
I want to tap into part of your background before elections, and that's the PR communication strategy part, and then you come into elections. What advice do you have for election officials in communicating with the media, communicating with voters? What strategies did you use to do that?
Yeah, my PR background helped a lot. As I said a few minutes ago, always respond to media requests promptly, accurately, and if you don't know, just let them know you don't know the answer. Fortunately, I knew a lot of the Kansas City media because I had worked with them previously, so I had a good rapport and relationship, and they knew I was pretty much a straight shooter.
I think that's one area, just quickly to touch on. What advice do you have for election officials to build those relationships? How do you, as a PR person, how do you go about building those relationships? What steps can you take to have that so that when you need it, it's there?
Yeah. Well, reach out to them. If you're new in the position, send them a note or call and say, hey, I'm the new elections person. I'd like to get together with you over coffee, find out what is it you like on election day, what kinds of information, or even before election day, what are the pieces of information that you need to do your job, and just let them know I can be a resource. You can also be a resource because the media can be a resource too. And so don't be afraid to reach out to them. They're human. They'll be glad to get the call. And then always return their call. Don't wait until you have the answer. If it's going to take 2 or 3 days, call them back right away and say, I don't have the answer yet, but I'll get it for you, and this is when I'm going to have it. Know their deadlines. Know that you should not call a newsroom at about 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon when they're having their huddle. Know the deadlines for your local paper. Know the deadlines for your TV newsrooms also. In this day and age, and Kansas City is a transition market, you find, particularly for TV, so you find a lot of newscasters coming through for a year, 3 years or so, on their way to a larger market. And actually that presents an opportunity because they're not always going to take the time to research the election laws or to really know all the details about an election. So you can kind of mentor them, and they'll be appreciative of that. And then when something does come up, they'll remember that, and you've got yourself a reporter who might be of help to you.
Yeah, I think it's one of the really underrated, important aspects of an election administrator. We ask so much of election administrators, your PR professionals, your IT managers, your HR
Human
managers,
relations.
you're right,
Yeah.
your logistics professionals, but that relationship building with the media, because it allows you, when something is going on, right or wrong, that they trust you to provide them the information they need.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you can also give them tips, not gossip, not misinformation, but if you're aware of something, not necessarily going on in elections, something that may be going on elsewhere in the city, let them know, hey, I just passed such and such, and it looks like this is something you might be interested in. Give them tips if you come across something. They really appreciate it because they're understaffed. Their business has been greatly impacted by social media, and so there are fewer reporters out there actually on the beat. They have to cover 10 things rather than just one thing like in the old days, so they appreciate that.
So, looking back over your career, if a young person comes to you and says, I want to get into this election administration thing, this is of interest to me, what advice do you have for them?
How thick is your skin? How much integrity do you think you have? How easy is it for you to be impartial and objective? Are you a good writer? Can you write? Do you pay attention to the details? Are you a little bit OCD? It's very important. And are you a little bit nutty?
Nutty
Just a
in
little
what way?
bit. Just a little bit. Well, elections work. You have to like to live on the edge a little bit. It's no election is ever the same. Actually, no day in the office is ever the same. you know. So you have to like to live on the edge just a little bit. And we all hold our breaths on election morning because you don't know, despite everything that you've done, you've proofed that ballot, you've got all of your poll workers in place, but until that first voter walks in at 6 a.m., you will not know whether you have the right ballot at the right precinct, whether you have everybody's name on the ballot. You're not going to know it until people start to vote. And so you hold your breath for like the first hour every election morning.
Yep. I had a colleague once describe it to me as it's similar to an airplane, where takeoff and landing are the riskiest parts, right?
Sure.
So in the morning, when he would get past a certain point in the morning, he knew we're good, we're in the air.
Yes.
And then when we're coming in for the landing, he knew, okay, here we go again with
Yes.
the risks, right?
Yes, exactly.
I always thought that was a really good kind of comparison. Tell me, what changed the most in your time as elections director? What were the biggest changes to the elections process, or even just to the coverage of the elections process, how it was viewed?
The big changes in the election process would be the introduction of electronic poll books, also the increase in voters being able to register online. Online voter registration has been a big change. The attention to election laws around the country was huge during this period, the 9.5 years that I was an elections administrator. Lots of changes in photo ID and early voting. So there was a lot of spotlight on elections during that period.
When you talk to your colleagues around the country about those changes, and some of the ones that were in it longer than you were, did you find that the industry has embraced that kind of new level of attention, or it's something that is continued to be struggled with in election administration?
Well, I think those who'd been in the business longer than I, if they'd gone through the 2000 election where there was really a spotlight, I think if you went through that, there was really nothing else that could phase you,
Right.
really. And I think elections officials are a rare breed. You get legislation in your state legislatures every year, and you just take it in stride. Either it's going to pass and you're going to have to implement it, or it's not. And so you just wait and see, and if it passes, you implement it because that's your job.
Where do you see the election administration, the elections process moving forward? What changes did you either see on the horizon coming, or would have liked to have seen happen in your office?
Well, as Doug said, the industry has become more professional through the SARA program that the Election Center offers, where you can go to the University of Auburn University and take classes and become certified. That trend will continue. I believe you can now major in a couple of universities, and I can't recall where. You can major in elections administration, which is great. I mean, that's great. And so that trend, I think, will continue. In my own office, I was big on staff development and training, and we created something called Kansas City Election Board Academy for staff to be able to take classes in various topics regarding elections administration. And I also push for staff to go to conferences and attend conferences. And so you could accumulate, we had an in-house kind of thing. You accumulated credits, and it became part of our performance evaluation. Whether we could take online classes also, our KCB Academy, we might do the class in the form of Jeopardy, where you're learning Missouri election laws, things that you didn't know, or why we did things a certain way. And so I think the professionalization of elections administration will continue, and there's been a lot of progress made.
You just
in that
made me
area.
think, one of the big challenges at the local level in particular is retaining younger employees.
Yes.
What advice strategies did you use to try to retain? I would think that ongoing education that you just mentioned would be one avenue to
Yeah.
try to keep younger employees
Yeah,
engaged.
absolutely. Well, one of the reasons I wanted to reorganize the office was so that there would be kind of a career path, that someone coming in could see, oh, I can start here, and then I can go to this level and this level and this level. And so you could start out even as a temp in our office, part-time, or as a what do we call them? I'm trying to think of what. Anyway, so we had supervisory levels, and I developed three distinct departments, and so you could see that you could move up, and then we had assistant directors and then director. And that gave you a way, if you wanted to stay in elections administration, it gave you a path that you could see that you could move up, and we didn't have that before. So that's something that I would recommend any agency. We were a small to medium-sized staff of 26, and we had people who stayed 25, 30 years, but in the same position, because there was nowhere to move. There was really nowhere to move.
Yeah. I think one area where I know from talking to your folks in your office too is that embracing of technology, both within the office and as part of the elections process, allowed them to engage with topics that they enjoyed, right?
Yes.
You know, they really enjoyed the technology that you allowed them to use and look at as part of the process too.
Right.
All right, lastly, what advice, I know you just recently left, right? What advice do you have heading into this big presidential election year? What recommendations do you have for your colleagues out there preparing for November?
I think if I were still on the job, I probably would want, the advice that I would give, or what I would do, is to be sure that any myths or misinformation that's bound to occur as we get close to November is immediately squashed. And even leading up to that, if you have public forums on what your voting rights are, what you can expect to happen, that kind of thing, to give the public a sense of comfort about when they go in to vote, their vote is not only going to count, but that the election is being conducted fairly, transparently, correctly, and accurately. So that when we all wake up on November the 9th, whoever the winner is, all Americans should feel, yes, my vote counted, those votes were counted accurately, done deal. Because it's a crazy year. And there's just so much suspicion and rumors, and it's going to get a little crazier as we get closer to November.
It's a scary thought.
Yeah.
Well, Shelley McThomas, thank you for your time. Thank you for your service as elections director in Kansas City in the years you put in. I appreciate it so much.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you.